Guys, we are going to pick up where we left off the last time that I had uploaded a video. I have been having some technical difficulties, so bear with me. The last couple ones have been too long to actually download to my YouTube. So I'm going to try to shorten things up a little bit and make sure that we can get these downloaded for you every day. Okay, we're on page 122, House with a Clock in Its Walls. The strange things didn't go on all the time, of course, just now and then over a long cold winter of 48-49. When spring came, Lewis was surprised to see that the hedge in front of the Hanchett house was widely overgrown. It was a spirea hedge and it always had bristly little pink and white blossoms. This spring, there were no blossoms on the hedge. It had turned into a dark, thorny thicket that completely hid the first floor windows and sent long, wavy tendrils up to scrape at the zinc gutter troughs. Burdocks and Alinus trees had grown up overnight near the house. Their branches screened the second-story windows. Lewis still had not seen much of the new neighbor. Once from a distance he had caught a glimpse of a dark, huddled figure rattling a key in the front door, and from his window seat he had seen her passing to and fro on the second floor. But aside from that, the old woman had kept out of sight. Lewis had figured it would be like that. She did have visitors, though. One visitor that was Hammer Handle. Lewis had seen him coming away from Mrs. O'Meager's back door late one night, and twice on his way to the movies in the evening. Lewis had literally bumped into Hammerhandle, who was huddling along High Street towards the Hanchett house, his shabby overcoat buttoned up to the neck. Both times Hammerhandle had been carrying packages, odd little bundles wrapped in brown paper and twine, and both times they had collided because Hammerhandle kept looking behind him. The second time they met this way, Hammerhandle grabbed Lewis by the collar, the way he did before. He pressed his unshaven muzzle to Lewis's ear and growled, "You little snip, you're looking to have your throat cut, aren't you?" Lewis pulled away from him, but he didn't run. He faced Hammerhandle down. "Get out of here, you rotten old bum. If you ever try to do anything to me, my uncle will fix you." Hammerhandle laughed, though it sounded more like he was having a choking fit. "Your uncle?" he said, sneering. "Your uncle will get his sooner than he thinks. The end of the world is at hand. Don't you read your Bible like a good little boy? There have been signs, and there will be more. Prepare." And with that, he stumbled up on the hill, clutching his parcel tightly. The day after this strange meeting was cold and rainy, and Lewis stayed indoors. Jonathan was over at Mrs. Zimmerman's helping her bottle some of prune brandy, so Lewis was alone. He decided to go poke around in the back rooms up on the third floor. The third floor rooms were generally unused, and Jonathan had shut the heat off in them to save money. But Lewis had found interesting things up there, like boxes full of chessmen and china doorknobs and wall cupboards that you could actually climb up inside of. Lewis wandered down the drafty hall, opening and closing doors. None of the rooms seemed worth exploring today. But wait, sure, the room with the parlor organ. He could go play it. That would be fun. One of the disused parlors on the third floor had a dusty old parlor organ in it. It was one of the few pieces of furniture that was left from the time Isaac Izard had lived in the house. Of course, there was the parlor organ downstairs, the good one, but it was a player organ and often refused to let Lewis play whatever he wanted to play. This one up here was wheezy, and in the winter its voice was only a whisper, but you could sometimes get good tunes out of it if you pumped hard. Lewis opened the door. The parlor organ was a bulky shadow against one wall. Lewis found the light switch, and the light came on. He wiped some of the dust off and sat down. What would he play? Chopsticks? Probably. Or from a wigwam. His repertoire wasn't very large. Lewis pumped the worn treadles, and he heard the hissing and puffing that came down from deep inside the machine. He touched the keys, but all he got was a gaspy, tubular sound. He sat back and thought. Over the keys was a row of black organ stops with labels that said things like V, Ox, and Flute, and Humana. Lewis knew that these stops were supposed to change the sound of the organ in various ways, but he had never pulled any of them out. Well, now was the time. He grabbed one of the black tubes and tugged gently. It wouldn't budge. He wiggled the stop and pulled harder. The whole thing came out in his hand. Lewis sat there, staring stupidly at the piece of wood. At first he felt bad about breaking the organ, but then he looked more closely at the stop. The end that had been in the organ was blunt, smooth, and painted black. There was no sign that it had ever been hooked up to anything. What a cheesy outfit, Lewis thought. I wonder if they're all like that. Let's see. He pulled another. Pop! Pulled them all out. Pop, 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 pop. Lewis laughed. He rolled the black tubes back and forth over the keyboard, but then he stopped and thought. He had read a story once where a car had a dummy dashboard that came out so you could hide things behind it. What if this organ... He got up, went downstairs, and he went all the way down to the cellar where Jonathan kept his tools. He opened the toolbox and took out a screwdriver, a hammer, a rusty butter knife that Jonathan kept in there for prying things open, and then he went back upstairs as fast as he could. Now Lewis was sitting at the organ again. He scanned the long wooden panel. 7 round black holes stared back at him. There were 4 screws holding the panel to the organ case, and they came out easily. Lewis stuck his fingers into 2 of the holes and pulled. The panel was stuck. He thought a bit, and then he picked up the butter knife and slid it into the crack. Screet! A little edgy of dust rose, and it tickled his nostrils. He moved the knife along to the right a bit and pried again. Shriek! The panel flapped out onto the keyboard. Ah, now he could see what it was. Lewis bent over and put his head close to the hole. He could smell a lot of dust, but he couldn't see a thing in there. Darn it, he had forgotten to bring a flashlight. He reached in and felt around. His arm went all the way into his armpit. He groped some more. What was this? Paper? He heard a dry crackling sound. Maybe it was money. He grabbed a hold of the bundle and drew it out. His heart sank. It was just an old pile of papers. Lewis sat there staring at them in disgust. So this was the secret treasure of Izzard's castle? Some treasure? Well, there might be something interesting in them, like secret formulas. He flipped through the papers. He flipped some more. The light in the room was very weak, and the old paper had turned practically the same shade as the copper-colored ink Isaac Izzard had used. He figured the writing must be Isaac Izzard, since the first sheet said, "Cloud formations and other phenomena, observed from this window by Isaac Izzard." Hadn't Mrs. Zimmerman said that she had seen old Isaac taking notes in the sky? There were dates here and entries after them. Lewis had read a few entries, and his eyes opened wider. He leafed some more. A splatter of rain hit the window. Lewis jumped. Outside, he could see thick masses of blue clouds piling up on the west. Through them ran a jagged red streak. It looked to Lewis like a hungry mouth. As he watched the mouth open, a ray of blood-red light shot into the room. It lit up the page he was holding. On the page were scrawled these words, "Doomsday not come yet. I'll draw it near by a perspective or make a clock that shall set all the world on fire upon an instant." Lewis felt very frightened. He gathered the papers together and started to get up. As he did so, he heard a noise, a very faint noise. Something was fluttering around down inside the organ case. Lewis stumbled backward, knocking over the bench. The paper slid out of his hand and scattered all over the floor. What should he do? Run for his life or save the papers? He gritted his teeth and knelt down. As he gathered up the sheets, he said to himself over and over again, Cua tu est Deus, fortitudo mea. Cua te est Deus, fortitudo mea. Now he had all the papers again. He was about to dash for the door when he saw something come floating up out of the darkness inside the organ. A moth with silver gray wings. They shone like leaves in the moonlight. Lewis ran to the door. He rattled the knob, but he couldn't get it open. Now he could feel the moth in his hair. Lewis went rigid. His face flushed. He was not scared anymore. He was angry, very angry. He swatted the moth and crushed it. Lewis felt a horrible runny stickiness in his hand, and fear came rushing back. He wiped his hand frantically on his trouser leg. Now Lewis was in the hall, running and shouting, "Uncle Jonathan, Mrs. Zimmerman, come quick! Oh, please come quick! I found something, Uncle Jonathan!" A little while later, Jonathan, Lewis, and Mrs. Zimmerman were sitting around Mrs. Zimmerman's kitchen table drinking cocoa. The dusty papers lay in a heap on the table. Jonathan had put down his mug and said, "No, Lewis, I'll tell you again, there's nothing to worry about. Old Isaac was crazy as a coot. This stuff has nothing to do with that ticking noise in the wall. Or if it does, it can't help us any. It can only frighten us. I'd say that's why Isaac left those papers there. Wouldn't you, Jonathan? To frighten us to death, I mean?" That was Mrs. Zimmerman speaking. She was standing at the stove with her back to Lewis, and she was making a great show of stirring the cocoa. Sure, I'd say that's what it was, Florence, said Jonathan, nodding. One last trick for the road, that sort of thing. Lewis looked from one to the other. He knew that they were covering up, but what could he say? One thing would lead to another, and before long he would have to tell about Halloween night. When you're hiding something, you get the feeling that every other secret is connected to your secret. Lewis couldn't challenge anyone for fear of being exposed. We're going to stop there at page 130. Leave a comment. Let us know what you think so far, what you're thinking, an interesting fact that you read, or a question.